like and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Beyond Antarctica, Chapter 32. The crowd surged forward, a sea of frightened faces as thousands of children and teens were ushered through the narrow, dimly lit corridors. The sound of feet shuffling against the ground, punctuated by panicked whispers, filled the air as they made their way toward the massive crystal cavern. The facility continued to groan and rumble beneath the strain of constant tremors. Above them, the ceiling creaked ominously, bits of debris occasionally raining down like warnings from the crumbling world they were desperately trying to escape. John and the rest of the crew led the charge, trying to maintain some semblance of order amidst the chaos. Every step felt precarious, every second crucial. The air was thick with dust, the faint glow of emergency lights casting an eerie glow that barely penetrated the gloom. As they entered the vast cavern, the sight before them was terrifying. The walls were lined with crystals, shimmering like stars against the jagged rock. The fractured light reflected off their faces, giving the cavern an otherworldly beauty. But there was no time to marvel. "We need to keep moving. Stay together, and don't stop." Kim's voice rang out over the murmur of the crowd, doing her best to guide the frightened masses forward. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but she pushed it aside, focused only on getting everyone to safety. The cavern stretched out before them, massive, with towering walls that seemed to reach into the heavens. The crystals, once a sight to behold, now flickered ominously, as if mirroring the instability of the ground beneath them. Todd points out there close to the exit. He thinks he remembers the path from here. There are some old ruins up ahead. Jackson says, "You mean the excavation site." The path ahead twisted, and though the exit seemed tantalizingly close, every step forward felt like a battle against the collapsing world around them. John was at the front, his voice scratchy as he called out directions, his every command aimed at keeping the terrified group moving. "Come on, stay close, don't lag behind. We're almost there." You could see the determination on his face, but even he couldn't mask the concern lurking in his eyes. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the ground beneath them, sending cracks spidering up the walls. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, with fear and panic threatening to take hold. Before anyone could react, a large piece of debris broke free from the ceiling and came crashing down. Shouts of alarm filled the air as people scattered, narrowly avoiding the deadly boulder. Just then, more debris fell, smaller chunks this time. In the midst of the chaos, Jackson threw his arm up to shield himself. He grunted in pain as the debris slammed into his arm, knocking him to the ground. Kim noticed his arm was twisted unnaturally as he cradled it to his chest, with his face contorted in agony. Her heart skipped a beat as she spotted him. Without hesitation, she pushed through the crowd, reaching him just as he let out a low groan. "Jackson!" she shouted, dropping to her knees beside him. His face was pale and his breath came in ragged gasps. "Your arm, it's broken." Jackson tried to wave her off, but he could not lift his arm, with his eyes watering with the effort. Don't stop. Just get them out of here," he demanded. Ignoring his protest, she said, "Don't be silly. No one gets left behind." Kim turned and signaled to Bob. "Bob, I need your pack, now." Bob pulled his pack off his back, with his broad shoulders straining under the weight of the situation. "I'm on it," he muttered as he rummaged through the pack. He tossed her 2 tent poles and some cloth, watching with admiration as Kim moved to fashion a makeshift splint. She worked with quiet precision, tying the poles to Jackson's arm with strips of cloth. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, because she had, more times than she cared to remember. Jackson winced, biting back a groan as the splint was tightened around his arm. His face was slick with sweat, but he managed a weak smile. "You're a damn good medic, Kim." "Thank you." Kim smirked, with her tone dry. "You're lucky it's just your arm. If you did not act so fast, it would have hit you in the head. Count your blessings." Bob chuckled as he hefted Jackson to his feet. "Kim's been patching me up for years. If she can fix this beat-up old body, she can fix anyone." "Old," Tony interjected, grinning as he helped steady Jackson. "I'd say Bob's more ruggedly weathered, like a giant boulder that's been worn down over the centuries." Bob shot him a playful glare. "Careful, that almost sounded like an insult." The brief levity brought a flicker of relief to the tense atmosphere, but it was short-lived. The tremors had grown more intense, and the cavern around them continued to shift and crack. The task of moving thousands of terrified children through the crumbling tunnels was proving monumental. It was as if the very island itself was determined to slow their escape, or worse, stop them. The rough ground made progress slow, and the crowd's fear threatened to turn into full-blown panic. Some of the older teens began to shove their way to the front, desperate to get out, while the younger children were pushed to the side, terrified and sobbing. "We can't let them trample each other," John growled, with his eyes scanning the crowd. "Bob, Tony, get up front and restore some order. We need to slow this down." Tony nodded, already moving to intercept the panicked teens. Bob quickly positioned himself like a human barricade, using his sheer size to force the group to slow down. "Everyone will get out of here," he shouted, with his voice ringing out over the clamor. "But if you push, you'll only hurt the ones behind you." One boy, no more than 6 or 7, tripped in the chaos, falling hard on his ankle. He let out a scream as his ankle twisted awkwardly beneath him. Kim was there in an instant, scooping the boy into her arms, despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "I've got you," she whispered, cradling him as she pressed forward, determined not to leave anyone behind. Another tremor rocked the ground, sending debris raining down from the ceiling. A loud crack echoed through the chamber, followed by a section of the cavern's roof collapsing behind them. Dust and rubble surged forward like a tidal wave, pushing the crowd into a tighter knot. John reached out, grabbing Kim by the arm and yanking her back just as the ground behind her gave way, crumbling into a deep chasm. "Watch it!" he barked, with his heart pounding as the child clung to her neck. Kim glanced back at the hole in the ground, staring down at the empty void, with her breath catching in her throat. That was too close. Way too close, John agreed, with his grip tightening on her arm. "Stay focused. We need to keep them moving." The path grew steeper and narrower as they approached the surface. The air was thick with dust, making it difficult to breathe. The children, many of them exhausted and scared, slowed to a crawl. Kim and the others did their best to encourage them, but the weight of the situation was beginning to take its toll on everyone. Another violent tremor sent a wave of debris crashing down, narrowly missing a group of teens. Jackson, still nursing his broken arm, stumbled but kept moving. He was determined not to slow them down. Bob was by his side, offering a steadying hand. The shimmering beauty of the crystal-lined walls seemed like a cruel joke now, a fragile and fleeting reminder of what was at stake. The entire structure felt as though it was seconds away from collapse. Todd pointed toward the far end of the cavern where a faint light glowed in the distance. "That's the exit. We're almost there." As the group pushed forward through the dust-filled cavern, Jackson suddenly stopped. "There it is. The excavation site. Part of that structure was exposed not too long ago. This is where the former leader found something Hope didn't want the leadership to know about." Tony, observant, followed Jackson's gaze and nodded. "Yeah, I remember. That's where we found the stuff that led us here in the first place." He scratched his head, glancing between Jackson and the others. "We really did not get a good look before." "I want to take a quick peek," Jackson said. Todd replies, "I would love to go with you. There was a lot more I wanted to look at before." Kim's eyes flickered toward the excavation site, with the crumbling stone structure barely visible through the dim light. "We should keep moving," she urged. "You know, the earth has been rumbling beneath our feet for the better part of the journey, and you want to go play Indiana Jones." Kim mumbled. "I swear I'm the only responsible adult here." But Jackson was already moving, leading the charge toward the dark opening. "Get them to the entrance of the cavern," he commanded, gesturing toward the thousands of children and teens who were being funneled through the main path. "I just need a quick look. The former leader died for this discovery, and I want to know what he died for. What was Hope trying to hide?" Kim, John, and the others shared a look of uncertainty, but moved on as Jackson and Todd went into the excavation site. The entrance was partially blocked by fallen stones, but a narrow path led deeper inside. The air was stale, heavy with dust and the faint scent of decay. Inside, The walls were covered in ancient carvings, their intricate details telling a story that seemed to echo from a time long forgotten. Jackson's eyes widened as he ran his fingers over the carvings. These carvings, they depict the construction of the facility. His voice was filled with awe as he traced the lines etched into the stone. They built this place in the volcanic mountain. Todd squinted at the carvings, trying to make sense of the strange symbols and figures. "Wait, what's that?" he asked, pointing to a section of the wall. The carving showed enormous bones being unearthed, with their massive forms towering over the workers. Jackson nodded, his fingers still tracing the images. They reanimated them, using the DNA from the bones, then used them to sustain the facility. The carvings depicted the giants working the fields, harvesting food from the surface and delivering it to the city below. "But look here," Todd said, pointing to another section of the wall. The giants were depicted receiving glittering objects in return for their labor, simple bracelets made of broken crystal fragments left over from the mining process, were strung together with thin ropes and were placed at their feet. "They think those crystals are holy," Todd murmured. "They're superstitious. They believe those broken fragments are gifts from the gods." Jackson frowned, with his eyes scanning the rest of the carvings. "But they're just trash. Leftover debris from the mining operations. Hope has been manipulating them all this time, keeping them in line with superstition and false promises." Todd let out a low rumble. "So, they keep working the fields, bringing in the food, and in return, Hope throws them a bone, treating them like a bunch of dogs." Todd crossed his arms. "Keeps them in check. Give them just enough to keep them happy, but never enough for all of them. Classic tactic. Keeps them coming back, always wanting more." They continued deeper into the excavation site, with the air growing colder and more oppressive. Todd felt a chill run down his spine as they came to a large chamber. The carvings here were even more detailed, showing the giants in greater numbers, their enormous forms bowing before the entrance to the facility, offering their harvest in exchange for the crystal trinkets. One carving depicted a massive gas cloud erupting from the volcano, sweeping across the landscape and engulfing the unsuspecting giants below, thinning their numbers. Inscribed beneath it were the words, "Every 100 revolutions. This is the way, so future generations will fear the great mountain. The purge will keep their numbers at the right percentage, so the hoax will stay in place, and the cycle will continue." Jackson's face hardened as he took in the full scope of what the carvings revealed. He said quietly, "Hope manipulated them from the beginning, used their beliefs to control them, using them as slaves. That is so wrong. Humanity's survival or not, there had to be another way." Todd fell silent, with the weight of the revelation sinking in. The giants were brought back from the dead, to be nothing more than pawns in Hope's plan. Suddenly Kim's voice rang out, "We have a problem." Everyone turned toward her, their hearts pounding with dread as she stood frozen at the mouth of the cave, her hand raised in a signal to stop. Her face was pale, eyes wide with alarm. "Hide. Now." "Look over here," Todd shouted as he approached a table covered in intricate carvings. The images depicted an ancient pyramid with a large figure holding a crystal skull aloft in one hand and a crystal rod with a golden top in the other. His eyes widened in amazement when he realized the crystal rod still lay there, resting in a carefully crafted cradle, but beside it, beneath a large, jagged rock, lay the shattered fragments of the crystal skull, the rock having crushed and deeply dented its resting place. Jackson studied the inscriptions carefully and said, "It says here that much of our technology was developed from what we learned about this crystal skull and rod. It's the foundation to much of our technology, it seems." Tony's voice rang through the tunnels, calling down to them. "Kim wants you to get back now. Todd, let's go." Todd, casting one last glance at the scene, grabbed the crystal rod from the cradle, holding it firmly in his hands, and hollered back, "On our way," as they hurried back through the tunnels. Meanwhile, John moved toward her with haste, his hand instinctively reaching for his pistol. "What is it?" "Giants." Kim's voice shook as she gestured outside. "Hundreds of them, chanting, bowing toward the cave. It looks like they're worshiping it." The crew hurried to the entrance and peered out. The sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Hundreds of giants stood in rows, their massive bodies swaying rhythmically as they chanted in a low, rumbling tone. Their voices reverberated through the earth like the distant roll of thunder, vibrating the ground beneath their feet. Behind the giants were towering mountains of food, stacked as offerings, the sheer volume enough to sustain the facility for years. The giants, with their enormous hands raised in supplication, seemed oblivious to anything but their ritualistic worship. Rhythmic chanting grew louder, their voices echoing through the cavern with an almost hypnotic quality. Kim stood frozen as she realized just how precarious their situation was, as Jackson and Todd joined them to witness the spectacle. "They think their gods live in this cave," Jackson murmured, with his face pale as he watched the scene unfold. "They have no idea what's really going on here." "And what happens when they realize their gods aren't answering?" Todd asked. The mountain shook once more. As the dust fell, "We'll be crushed either way," Kim whispered. "We need to get out of here, and fast." John looked around at the crew. "We can't outrun them," he muttered, "but we can't stay here either." Another tremor rocked the ground, sending a shower of debris raining down from the cavern's roof. Kim's breath caught in her throat as she glanced toward the giants, as their chanting faltered, with their massive heads turning slowly toward the cave entrance. "Oh no," she whispered, with sweat dripping off her face. "They're looking this way." Kim's voice trembled as she gestured for everyone to move back into the shadows. "Get back and stay low. We can't let them see us." The giants started chanting once more, and it grew louder, more frenzied, as if they were calling for something or someone. The air was thick with tension, and Kim knew they were running out of time. Kim glanced back, her heart sinking as she realized hundreds of thousands were following them, countless more wounded or dead, and they had no way of knowing how many needed help. They couldn't afford to wait, not with time slipping through their fingers like sand. Time, the one thing they desperately needed, was a luxury they no longer had. As the ground shook once more, Kim could feel it deep in her bones. No matter the choice they made, one thing was clear: being crushed seemed inevitable. She looked to her father, and in a rare moment, with fear lacing her voice, she didn't call him Dad. Instead, she whispered, "Captain, what's our next move?" This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.